Welcome again, folks, to another episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit podcast. I am your host, Mark Hasera, and for over 60 years, my passion has been everything aviation. On the Lessons from the Cockpit show, we debrief some of the most fascinating and intriguing pilots, aircrew members, maintainers, and aviation enthusiasts from all over the world. Our purpose is to hear their stories, but more importantly, what did they learn from these extraordinary and extreme situations that they talk about during their flying career. Our purpose is to expand critical thinking skills both in the air and on the ground. And folks, you're going to hear stories here for the very first time on the Lessons from the Cockpit show. And today is one of those days where you're going to hear some amazing things. The Lessons from the Cockpit show is sponsored and financed by wallpilot.com, aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. These are 4, 6, and 8-foot airplane images printed on vinyl. Very, very detailed because we do a lot of research on these things. You can peel them off, stick them to any flat surface, or you can just frame them. Not only do we do the aircraft, but we also do like the squadron patches and things. We can customize airplanes, put your name, weapons load, the tail number that you flew from the unit you flew with. So, grab an adult beverage of your choice, sit down, strap in, and let's begin the Lessons from the Cockpit show with Chief Warrant Officer Greg Calvert, pilot of Razor 1, shot down during the Battle of Roberts Ridge. Calvert, how are you?
Good afternoon. I'm doing fantastic. Thank you very much for having me, Mark.
I'm so glad to have you on, Greg, because our lives were intertwined 20 years ago, weren't they?
Yes, they were.
So,
and without either one of us knowing anything about it.
Until 20 years later. That's the crazy thing, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you tell all of our audience who you are and what you used to do?
I started off my career in the Army as a medic, as a paratrooper medic in the 82nd Airborne Division, lowly private E1. Worked my way up, did that for 4 years, became a flight medic after that. And that's where I kind of fell in love with aviation. Flew a number of different aircraft for a few years. And then I was actually in the UH-60 instructor pilot course. And one of the people in my course was a guy from the 160th. And of course, that time in the early to mid 90s, the 160th, of course, still had a certain mystique about it. I guess I had done something right. He handed me a packet and said, Greg, I think you're the kind of person that might succeed here. Why don't you fill this out, make an application? At that time, it was pretty much invitation only. You either knew somebody. It wasn't like you went to an in-service recruiter or something like that. It was kind of word of mouth. So I filled out the packet and was given a letter saying we'd like you to come. And at that time, of course, it's still the same way, but you have to go through an assessment program, a 1-week assessment program that is nothing but a week long of stress to kind of figure out whether you have kind of the mettle to be what they want, more than whether you're a good pilot. Because I always tell everybody that's in the 160th, it's not that you were a great pilot going into the 160th. It was more a question of work ethic, attitude, and if your personality would kind of fit into the mold. And they really look for the kind of personality you are, probably more than anything else. What your attitude is, how well do you work well with others, what's your work ethic. From that, they say, hey, we can train anybody to do that. So it's not a bunch of supermen like most people think. Really, the thing that sets...
To the rest of us, you are.
Not hardly. The thing that sets 160th pilots and the organization apart is how it trains. You're constantly training, and that training is very realistic. And that starts with that assessment that I was talking to you about. Here I was, a UH-60 pilot. The guy that I knew had been a DAP pilot, which is the Armed Blackhawks. And I thought, oh, cool. I'm going to go be an armed DAP pilot because I had been a Cobra pilot before I was a Blackhawk pilot. So I knew gun systems and how to employ them as a young aviator. So I thought this would be perfect for me. On the second day of assessment, they handed me Chapter 5 and 9, which is limitations and emergency procedures, and told me I was going to take a check ride 2 days later in MH-47 Chinook. I had never even sat in the cockpit of a Chinook before at that point in time.
2 days? You had 2 days to prepare?
Yes, for a full standardization check ride in the MH-47 Chinook.
No stress there.
No stress there. So, they do a lot. There's a lot of other things that go into that week: physical assessment, swim test, psychological assessments, interviews, and of course the flight training and navigation that goes into that. And I went out, and it wasn't pretty. But when I finally went, but the final event is a board where you're in front of instructor pilots, senior officers, the psychologists, senior NCOs. They grill you for a couple of hours. By the time you're done with it, no matter what you had done in the past, you feel like you're about 3 inches tall when you leave the room. And then they go and discuss it, and they bring you back in the room. When they brought me back into the room, I thought, this is the end of my career. I'm going back to being a Black Hawk instructor pilot somewhere in the Army. But they told me I was accepted, and would I accept an invitation to come and train with the organization? It went on from there. Went to Green Platoon not long after that. And Green Platoon is the training program for all Night Stalkers. No matter your military occupation, enlisted, officer, everybody goes through a Green Platoon process. And that's where it went from there.
That is incredible.
It's
like being a test pilot. You got 2 days to prepare to go fly this airplane.
And like I said, I make no bones about it that it was not a pretty ride. I didn't crash. I didn't damage anything, and I didn't scare the instructor pilot too badly. He later on became a good friend and neighbor of mine.
Oh, excellent. As they say, my takeoffs and landings were 1-to-1.
Yes. and that happened that day.
Excellent. Tell everybody the history of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, because this is really fascinating.
There have been books that have been written on this that will do a far better job than I can, but you're really steeped in the history and the traditions of the organization from day one. Going through training. Of course, we all know that what happened during Operation Eagle Claw, which commonly known as Desert One. I won't go into all that, but the ramifications, one of the biggest after-action review comments that came after that mission is that the U.S. needed a dedicated special operations aviation force that could work seamlessly with ground forces. And that was the whole goal of it all along. This will probably ruffle some people's feathers, but a lot of aviators think of themselves as the tip of the spear. But in the 160th, it's really about the customer. We don't hold ourselves. Everything that we do is about customer support. And that was instilled from the beginning because of what happened during Eagle Claw, Desert One. So they started this force, and then there was another planning cell that began for another rescue attempt. The hostages in Iran. And what they did was take people, they were specially identified who were in the 101st Aviation at the time at Fort Campbell, guys with lots of experience, guys with great attitudes, and saying, hey, we want you to do something that's never been done before. The plank holder of a totally new concept. I don't know. I know a few, I've met a few of those men, and a few of them were actually guys taught me how to be a Night Stalker. Just an incredible group of men who just went out and started developing really tactics, techniques, procedures that had never been done before. Night vision goggle use that was so in its infancy then. Continued to develop these products to get ready for this second hostage rescue. Well, we all know that didn't have to occur. What came out of that is the metamorphosis of the Special Operations Command. And within that organization, they felt like we have created this new nucleus of aviators who are specially trained, who are dedicated to a SOF, Special Operations Force mission. We can't just let this go. We need to continue to let this mature and develop. And it started with Little Birds, and then Black Hawks were added to the mix. And then a small contingent of Chinooks were brought in to support those operations. And then now you have the 160th Special Operations Group You have the beginnings of what everybody terms as TF, Task Force 160, and it continues to grow from there. And you just have some phenomenal missions during Grenada, Panama. The list goes on, and some lists that will never be published of the kind of operations that these guys did. And the Chinooks really came into their own when they were given an assignment to go deep into Africa and pick up a Hind helicopter that had been left on the battlefield in Sudan.
I didn't know that.
Oh, it's a little known mission. You can find it on the internet. Some talk about it. Matter of fact, one of my instructors during Green Platoon was actually the pilot, the flight lead on that mission. But they went deep into Africa through semi-permissive and non-permissive environments and literally stole a helicopter, slung loaded under one of the Chinooks, and flew it out of country so it could be brought back to the United States. So that's kind of the genesis of how the Chinooks became an integral part of TF-160 instead of an add-on. And now you have every battalion, except for 1st Battalion in the regiment, is a mixture of Chinooks and Blackhawks.
So are the Little Birds in their own group?
The Little Birds are part of 1st Battalion.
Okay.
And of course, there's 2 different types of Little Birds. And I have some great friends there. And sometime you'll have to get a Little Bird pilot on here because the things that they can do with that aircraft and the dedication they have to the mission of supporting the National Command Authority and the customers is absolutely incredible. Fantastic guys to work with.
So I was watching the Predator feed of Jessica Lynch's rescue at the KAOC.
Oh, yes.
We're sitting there, they're watching that hospital, Greg, and all of a sudden 2 little birds go whoop around it. Okay, here it goes, and it was amazing to watch and see these helicopters, like 60 degrees of bank going around this thing with guys sitting in the door. Sitting in the door, and they put benches.
Planks on the side.
Yeah, on those little planks. And there's like, oh yeah, we do this every day at night on night vision goggles. It's no big deal. And come in and start sweeping the area. And then, of course, the other helicopters come in and people have seen the video of them marching her out. I'll tell you something. When we saw her come out with the guys carrying her, Task Force 20 carrying her out, all of us got a big lump in our throat. And we're all going, yes, like this. Okay.
As everybody in the community was doing.
Oh, yeah. That was.
But again, that shows the dedication to the mission and the idea that the customer comes first and the precious cargo comes first in the mission. That sacred vow we have about not leaving anyone behind, even though she was a private or a specialist in a transportation unit, she is still critical to us as soldiers, critical for us to go in and get her.
Yeah, and the story behind that's incredible. We'll save for another day. And I'm sure you guys had other rescue missions like this in places that, we can't probably talk about. But this is the thing that you guys do is you go in, like you said, we go after customers and we don't care who they are. We're told this is an important person. We got to pull them, he or she, out. And you guys do it.
And it really is. I can't stress that enough to people, that concept of leaving no one behind. It really is integral to how you're brought up as a Night Stalker, whether it's a customer, whether it's someone you're going in to rescue, whatever the mission is, everything that we do. And it's not our job to say no. It's our job to figure out a way to say yes. And if the ground force hasn't come up with that yes or the wrong yes, then it's up to us to kind of figure out how we get to yes.
Yeah. And of course, you guys have had a lot of famous yeses, as we all know.
Yeah.
Of course, Abbottabad being one of them. I can only imagine what those guys must have thought when they saw this low observable helicopter that they're going to fly. And you being a helo pilot, I'm sure you're like going, wait, what is this? All of the things that you guys do. I love, Greg, that you're so calm and so unassuming about all this. It's like, we're not any different. We put our pants on like everybody else. one leg at a time.
Absolutely.
Except for when the horn goes off, sometimes we might do it 2 legs at a time. But, and you go to people in the military, they have stories just like you do, but so many people don't know it. They've never heard that. That's why I'm so glad to have you on, because this is a fantastic story of the 160th SOAR, and particularly missions that you were flying in March of 2002.
Well, and I speak to veterans groups sometimes about, post-traumatic growth and other issues. But that's one of the things I tell veterans. It's that it's important to tell our stories, not to pat ourselves on the back, but it's important for people to know the level of commitment of the American service member. It's important for people to know the length to what we will do things. And it's healthy for us as service members to speak about those things, because if they stay bottled up, you can develop stress about that. I've always made no bones that, I have no problem talking about what happened that day. I always like to use the phrase that I'm not about what happened to me. I'm about what I know, do, and executed after that. That's what defines me. That day doesn't define me, but what I made of it afterwards is what defines me. And that was part of my growth as a Night Stalker. There's a couple of books by Lieutenant Colonel Grossman, and he talks about stress inoculation. That's one of the things I talk about, especially with other service members, is that the harder you train and the more you prepare mentally, physically, spiritually, that's what inoculates you against that stress. When it really does hit the fan, you can find that calm place, even if you're scared as hell, fearful, but fear is good. And we can turn that into good things. Oh, sorry to get off track there.
No,
I could go on and on about that subject.
But what a great life lesson. Okay. A lot of us have bad things that happen to us in our lives, and you just can't let it anchor you. You just can't let that kind of thing anchor you to the point where unstable. No, maybe that's not the term, but you can't move.
You can't let it paralyze you.
Mm-hmm.
The thing you have to do is it's all about lessons learned. So you take that lessons learned from whatever you had, and where the mistake and the failures happen, if you don't apply those lessons that you've learned, it makes no difference whether you went back and looked at something and thought about it and talked about it. But if you don't go back and apply the lessons, then they're useless. And that's why I think it's important for us to talk about these things, because it applies those lessons not only to ourselves, but to other people who may face those in the future.
So you gave us a history of the 160th SOAR. And of course, everybody thinks you guys are supermen and women too. So that's a good question. Are there women in the 160th SOAR?
Yeah, yes, there are.
I figured
and they go through the same assessment process. There's no difference in the training and capability. And like I said before, nobody comes to the 160th. There are very few as Chuck Yeager or Charles Lindbergh. Yeah. It's more about attitude and capability and trainability and your ability to work as a team and with other people. The physical skills of flying can be taught to anyone. It's those other intangibles that really organizations like the 160th are looking for. They can train you from there, and they do. The Green Platoon for the Chinook is at that time when I went through, is almost a year long, including combat skills, basic navigation, and then your introduction and environmental training, which is over water, desert, mountain, in the MH-47.
They train here in Utah.
Yes.
They fly out of the Ox Field up here, and they fly right over the top of my house when they're going up to the mountains. And
there's a lot of training areas out in Nevada and Utah.
There is a lot of them. Okay. And you can do a lot of fun things out there. A lot of fun things.
Oh, yes.
But you know what, Greg? That's a great life lesson learned that you just mentioned about how these really elite teams, and it's funny because Simon Sinek talks about this in one of his talks. It's not about your skills, because if they're looking at you, you've already got the skills. But can you handle the pressure? How do you work with people around you? Are you toxic, not toxic? Those kinds of things that really make the elite team. And a lot of times you're looking at each other like, I'm not different than any of you guys or gals, but I'm just able to handle things in a different manner, like you had to do when we started Operation Anaconda. Because I think all of us were caught by surprise of what was going to happen and the magnitude of what this thing was going to look like. Why don't you tell us, how long had you been deployed to, I think it was, you're flying out of Bagram, correct?
I was actually flying out of Uzbekistan at first.
Okay.
So I flew my first mission on October 6th, 2001, after 9/11. We were already in that country, kind of hidden in Uzbekistan at that time.
So and the air campaign didn't start till the 7th, didn't it? So you guys were already there.
Yes. Had to get people on the ground in there first.
Yeah, isn't that?
So,
I taught at the Joint Forces Staff College, and one of my students was in that very first group you dropped off. He says, yeah, we're usually there 2 weeks before you guys get there. Fascinating. Anyway.
Yeah. So we had been operating, been operating in Afghanistan for nearly 6 months. Nobody in the United States forces had ever operated in an environment such as Afghanistan. The weather, the terrain, from being a weapons school graduate, we talk about PK, probability of kill.
Yep.
The PK of terrain and weather is 100%.
Yeah.
Contrary to the enemy.
Yeah.
So that was our biggest threats, was learning how to perform in the weather and the terrain. So we spent a lot of time in those early missions developing tactics, techniques, and procedures that had never been done in the United States military before.
Because you're in 17,000 foot mountains.
Oh,
you're
absolutely.
In massive mountains.
It was the first time we were doing aerial refueling at 200 feet above the desert floor. It was the first time we employed terrain following radar in 0-0 conditions at 100 and 250 feet to put troops on an actual objective. There were so many things that we had the tools and we trained with them, but we had never employed them in actual combat conditions than we did. You look at the 6 months prior to Anaconda, and I hate to trivialize this, but it was a tremendous training and learning experience for all of us, even our most experienced pilots down to those of us who were less experienced at that point in time. We learned a tremendous amount. So by the time we're getting to Anaconda, we have a lot of good TTPs that we're going into the battle with. And we all felt, you never want to be arrogant in combat, but we were very confident in our capabilities. And that had proved on a number of missions prior to that point.
If you guys have been there for 6 months, you were used to the weather. And again, there's nothing
we had never been operating with oxygen masks on. So it was the first time that we as helicopter pilots are having positive pressure oxygen masks like a fighter pilot on our face.
That.
Yes. Oh, well, some of the terrain we had to go over. And we were doing insertions at 15,000 feet in a Chinook. Again, stuff people had never even done before.
So as Anaconda is getting closer, when did you guys find out that you're going to have to start putting people in the Shaikut Valley?
We found out probably, there were rumors about it about 2 weeks ahead of time. And then you start getting can you do this here? How many people can you take and get them here?
Science projects.
That's right.
Science projects.
The leader of a planning cell and the leader of a mission is called a flight lead in the 160th. It's a very experienced, very knowledgeable guy or gal. I don't know if there's any flight leads now that are women, but they start looking at these things and wargaming it. And we put together the planning cell to start going through performance numbers, all of that. And so we started looking at these numbers. How many people can we lift and insert? What kind of weight can we get in at 11,000 feet, 12,000 feet, 15,000 feet? One of our big missions in the 160th is strategic reconnaissance insertion. So it's getting reconnaissance teams into places they normally can't get to, or the terrain doesn't allow for them to get to, or it's just a question of timing. How fast can we get people in to look at certain areas? We knew that going into Anaconda ahead of time, that we were going to have Our primary mission before Anaconda was going to be the insertion of a coalition of strategic reconnaissance teams, not only U.S. forces, not only U.S. SOF. We had a variety of countries. March 3rd, our flight of two, Razor 01 and 02, our designated mission for all of Anaconda was QRF, the Quick Reaction Force. So that's like a dedicated break glass in case of an emergency. That aircraft doesn't move until you need it. And we very rarely commit 100% of the force to a mission. That's just was not in our nature. You always need spares. You always need a quick reaction force, casualty evacuation, those kinds of things. Razor 01 and 02 were designated QRF. There were so many reconnaissance teams, and the battlefield was shifting around the Shaikat that they needed more teams inserted. So they decided, we're going to commit the rest of the force, Razor 01, 02, you've got these teams. And we actually had a coalition of teams from European nations, a whole host of people. We started inserting into key positions that night before up in snow-covered mountaintops and into positions over valleys so they could provide overwatch as the battle was, or the battle plan and the battle space was starting to take shape. And they decided, well, we don't need a person here, but we need people with eyes on at this point. Now you have basically 8 MH-47s that are just sprinkling people all over the mountains, the Gardes, Shaikat area.
You finally get a hold of the plan and you see what's happening and you're sprinkling these guys all out. But I've read that there was a lot of people uncomfortable with what was going to happen on top of Takur Ghar because you had a helicopter, I think, that had a maintenance problem. And then they asked to be inserted on top and they were getting pressure to get there. Correct? Yes. And that's a story. I'm part of that. But that's really, Al was really integral to that. Mm-hmm. But as things continued to shift, and I won't get into the politics or the command of it, but who were the right people to be? And there was a group of operators that had been training in that area, had been operating in that area for a long time. And the plan was to keep them in that area because they were acclimatized. They knew the geography. Their bodies and their minds were trained for that area. They needed to get more bodies from other organizations. And there was this key piece of terrain. One of the things we always looked at when we were, especially for strategic reconnaissance, because you want to go in fairly stealthily because you don't want to compromise the team that you're inserting. So acoustics and visibility, those were all critical to how we plan a mission, especially for strategic reconnaissance. When we look at a piece of terrain and everybody says, oh my gosh, this is the piece of terrain we have to hold to be able to have SA, situational awareness, over the whole valley. If we think it's a really good place to be on visiting turf, you think the home team doesn't know that already, that that's a great place to be? Yeah. That we're all on the same page.
It was probably a great place to be back in the Russian war in Afghanistan. And as we later found out, as well fortified as that position was, it probably dated back to the war with Russia, because Russia tried, or the Soviet Union tried, a battle in the Shaikat and had their asses handed to them.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. If you get a chance sometime, read Bear. It's kind of dry. It's a history book, but The Bear Went Over the Mountain.
I've heard of that book. I have heard of that book.
It's fascinating. Matter of fact, it was made to be my company commander. Again, I can't say enough great things about him at that time because I attribute a lot of our survival. He could see into the future, and the way we trained before going to Uzbekistan and Afghanistan absolutely set us physically and mentally ready. And the 160th is known for training like we fight like we train. Everything is realistic. There's very little artificiality put into any of our training, whether it's training with live ammunition, training with the customers, doing whatever we do. Shoot, we used to fly training missions with blanks in our weapons. We would always fly with our personal weapons to better acclimatize us, train us to the concept of, I've got live ammo on my body. I've got live ammo in a weapon in the chamber next to me, but it's got to be there if I need it. And it saved my ass that day, maybe, on the 4th. Yeah. But we always trained like we would fight. So he had this vision on how we would get ready for all of this.
And you know what? I've read Pete Blaber's book, The Men, the Mission, and Me. A fantastic
Yes, great book. Great book.
I recommend that to anybody to go read that book, because there's a really specific chapter on what happened here. And I'll never forget that portion of where he says the old goat herder that doesn't even know any English takes his staff and points to the mountain and says, Bin Laden. Even the goat herder knew he was up there when it comes time to do all this. So,
well, a lot of times we have, and I'm sure I'm not the first one to use that term, tactical arrogance, that all of our intelligence systems and all of our fancy technology, it's still the home turf of those guys. Yeah. And when I used to brief other people about threats, it doesn't matter whether they're wearing man dresses and sandals. They work really, really hard, probably harder than we do at killing us than we do killing them. So you never underestimate your mission. You never underestimate your contingencies, and you never, ever underestimate the enemy. Those are the three things that leads to that tactical arrogance that we're really guilty of a lot in U.S. military. We
really are, because we think we're the big hammer. Okay. And sometimes we've gotten hammered. And this was one of those days where,
yes,
one of those weeks where,
so it
we blew it.
It got,
I think we blew it.
And I won't disagree with you. People say that Anaconda, especially Takur Ghar, was a failure. And I don't consider it a failure.
I don't either.
At the core of it, we found, and we finished the enemy, and we brought everyone home.
Yes.
That to me is mission success. So when I hear people talk about, Anaconda failed, Takur Ghar was a huge debacle and failure. Yeah, there were problems with it, but in the end,
everybody came home.
If we made our mission statement. We fulfilled our mission, and I could go on for hours about U.S. Army Rangers.
I know.
They're the ultimate warriors, and that no fail attitude and the way, that ferocity of the way they plan and train and fight. Again, probably the one thing that saved us all from being wiped out and overrun was because of 1st of the 75th Ranger Regiment. Great men. Some of them I'm still friends with today that are just fantastic guys. But those are the kind of people we would train with and would prepare with. So when you're faced with a situation like we were on Takur Ghar, all of that training that we had done ahead of time as a flight crew, all of that training we had done with our customers, the training leading up to Anaconda. One of the jobs, I was not the pilot in command of Razor 01. So one of my jobs, while the command pilot, the flight lead, was doing his business, was to work with the QRF and get them trained up on aircraft, how we're going to function. When people look at, it's a quick reaction, they didn't know what's going on. There are certain TTPs and there are certain ground truths about combat that we had already worked out. And those guys, with everything going to hell and losing immediately 3 of their brothers, they did their jobs flawlessly.
I can't say enough good things about Nate Self.
Yeah.
And
Nate Self. And I won't use any of the other guys' names because they may not want me to, but Nate was a tremendous young leader faced with incredible situation that he handled magnificently. But you look at the people he had with him and the way I know that they trained in the weeks and months leading up to Anaconda. When you see something like that, and you know that no matter what they did, it wasn't a failure, because they absolutely turned the tide of a really, really bad situation.
Really
and
bad.
turned it into success. Nate Self, his NCOs that were in that platoon, some of the greatest warriors I have ever known.
I recommend his book to all my listeners too, Two Wars by Nate Self,
yes.
where he talks about this battle
book.
and he talks about the battle with PTSD afterward. It's a great book for everybody to learn. So,
and he's just a great, talk about a low key, non-assuming warrior. And even though he's not in the military anymore, he's still a warrior. He's just so soft spoken, and probably in a crowd, you would never pick him out as being this tremendous badass, as a leader of badasses. You would never picture it. And that's kind of what you find in the soft community as a whole.
So let's go to March 4th. All right. Your good buddy Al Mack takes them up there, and things go wrong, and Neil Roberts fall off the back. He lands in that valley. Where are you at during this time period? What are you doing as Razor 3 is going through its events, and you have to get prepared to take this quick reaction force up there?
First thing that happened was that Al Mack was actually in my aircraft. So his original aircraft developed an engine problem on the ground at Gardes. So as we were coming back from our infills, we actually swapped aircraft. And one of the things we learned from that was that usually it was a whole crew would swap to an aircraft. But what they did that night, for better or worse, and that's a whole other story, they only swapped pilots. Al kept my crew, our crew, on board that aircraft. And then we took his aircraft with his crew. We had a maintenance test pilot who was out there and got to Gardes, and my flight lead and the maintenance test pilot, we were on our way back to Bagram with this broken aircraft while Al took our aircraft into the mission. And it was about midway, maybe a little bit farther going back to Bagram, that we realized some bad things were happening. Possibly one of our flight had been shot down. There was a fog of battle, that whole notion. Definitely, there was a lot going on there. So at that point, Al is discussing with the customer the plan of how they're going to do things. And the original plan was to insert, as traditional with strategic reconnaissance, we're going to go to an offset LZ, and they're going to walk in. Being that, and this is Greg Calvert speaking, being that soft and conventional forces were not well integrated. And I will tell you, after the fact, looking at that, the total air piece was probably not well integrated as well. And so when you put in a soft mission that's very reactionary to the situation and can shift as the tactical situation arises, you've got a set piece battle and air tasking orders that really doesn't support a whole lot of deviation. And you probably realize that from your point of view, being chaos.
Absolutely. We were not ready to support some of the things that were going on there. I don't know if you know this. We actually closed down Operation Southern Watch because of what happened with you guys.
I read that there was just not enough assets and just had to shut that part of the mission down.
Yeah. I interviewed Matt Neuenswander, who was the operations group commander at Al Jaber. And he told me, he says, boss, we got to make a decision right now. We're shutting down Southern Watch so that we can send everything we need down there to help you guys. And we did that with this event.
And thank God. Those of us I was in the personnel recovery field as being a tactical operations officer in the Army. And I was well familiar with how you rack and stack assets when there's an isolating event. And it obviously, although it was pretty transparent or invisible to us, but, we know that process and the number of assets that were immediately deployed to support our operations later on. And then the operations, because of that set piece, Al's mission kept on getting pushed back and back and back because we couldn't get the aircraft through the airspace because of planned bombing strikes and reacting to the troops in contact calls on the ground and just the general preparation of the battlefield before a big operation.
And the friendly fire incident that happened too on the first day.
Yes. Which really complicated things when Mr. Harriman Chief Warrant Officer Harriman was killed. That really, really complicated things. And then it makes the whole process a little more risk adverse when something like that happens. So things that we would have been more reactionary to and a little more timely with, we're now getting second looks and third looks before we could take action on them.
Yeah. You finally get back to Gardez on the, now they're having to put the quick reaction force on you because of what's going on up there. What time frame are we talking about that morning, if you can remember?
We're talking about, by the time we got to Bagram and we know that one of our MH-47s is down, and that's all we knew at that point. There is a MH-47 down, and we're activating the quick reaction force to go secure that aircraft and evacuate, get our people back. That's all we knew at that time.
Leave no one behind. That's
right. And there's not even a question. You plan that mission and you go and do it. I don't mean to sound like that's flippant or that we're going into it blindly with, not thinking about what we're doing, because it's always deliberate, but we have a lot of templates already planned for how we're going to do these missions. Yeah. And it was time to employ that with the quick reaction force. I start the pilot in command. They go into the talk with the air commission commander, and the two of us, the other pilots and the crew members, we start prepping the aircraft. The backenders are readying the quick reaction force, getting the aircraft ready to go. We're up front. What we know at that time, start programming the aircraft and getting it ready to go. The MH-47 was a big computer. So we start programming the aircraft for the mission and making sure that as soon as air mission commander and the pilot and the command pilots come back out, that we are ready to launch. And we were immediately ready to go. As soon as they came back out in the aircraft and told us to proceed to Gardez as fast as possible, that's what we did. We get to that point in time, and now the situation's developing more, but it's also getting more confusing. As any big contingency situation goes, communications were, I've heard everything from there was broad spectrum jamming going in the valley to improper frequencies, improper fills for the secure comms, but there was just not a lot of good comms going on. At one point, we think we're just going to the site of a downed MH-47, and we know that the people survived it and that we are going to secure the site. The QRF is going to secure the site, and we're going to get the air crew and other customers out of the area. But as the flight lead starts looking at the coordinates and what's going on, we realize there's a difference between what we think we know the MH-47 and the coordinates of isolated personnel or an isolated person. So without even being able to talk back to our jock, we're starting to play the telephone game in this operation, where somebody is telling us something that somebody else told them, that somebody else told them. There's no direct comms. And we could talk for hours about the whole comms piece and comms plan for Anaconda, but it wasn't working. Let's just put it down to nuts and bolts. It wasn't working. It was
messed up.
Yes. As we're proceeding in, the flight lead is putting the coordinates in that we've kind of narrowed down the CEP, the circular error probability there for where we think this isolated person, and it's not in the valley where the MH-47 went down. It's like, we're going to MH-47 down. Why are we going now to this 10,500, 11,000 foot mountaintop? Somewhere between Gardez and Takur Ghar. And it was a common practice to split the radios. There's 6 different comms we could be using in that aircraft, and it's way more than one person can handle. So the flight lead made the decision to split the comms. I'm listening to monitoring the internal frequencies, because that's probably the last amount of chatter as I was on the controls. So less I would have to think about. And the big picture stuff was left to the flight lead and the air mission commander in the jump seat. So I didn't catch directly a lot of the comms, but I know we were talking to a P3 that we had never talked to before, a call sign we didn't recognize. And they're giving us coordinates and telling us what's going on and telling us there's an AC-130 on scene that has eyes on, and that we're now figuring out there's one person up there, or maybe a couple people up there, but we have no idea how they're connected with Razor 03. It's like, how did these guys get isolated on this mountaintop all by themselves? We had no idea what Razor 03 went to, because we were not privy to their mission, since it was a quick fragmentary order going into things. So that was developing within Razor 03 without the other Razor elements really knowing anything about it. And that's not uncommon, because we will all have our separate missions as part of a bigger mission. And that's kind of the way this went. So I don't want it to sound like this was a big juggling, because it was kind of our normal operation as part of a bigger mission. So we kind of figure out finally that we're going to a mountaintop. There are isolated Americans there. That is the priority for the mission. And, looking back, a lot of people, and there's been a lot of articles, and I know some military studies at the professional military education level talking
armchair quarterbacking is the term for that,
about why Razor 01 didn't pay attention to their orders that were coming from Masira, coming from Tampa, where the generals were talking and watching all of this going on. But none of that was being communicated to us at that time. So we had no idea that there were orders out there saying, don't go. And I know from things I've talked to the people on the ground and read afterwards, Blaber was in there. Our command was in there screaming, you can't send them in there. Don't go. If you, and then the jock knew that soon we were going to lose AC-130 coverage, which another tangent. There's all kinds of tentacles that go off this, but they're saying you take that AC-130 coverage off, that there's an aircraft going down. And of course, this is all after the fact that I learned later. But
you don't know any of this when this is going on, do you?
No,
none of this information is being shared with you guys.
No, we have no idea. We're talking to a P3 above, and we finally get in touch with an AC-130. The P3 just gives us a coordinate and saying they've got eyes on an isolated person or persons that are U.S. on the ground there. And our last orders were go get our people. Mm-hmm. And not knowing anything else, that's what we're going to do. That's again, that's our sacred vow to each other and to our customers and to every service member for that matter. Somebody's going to be there for you. And luck of the draw, that was us that day. So we go in just to make sure. The flight lead decides this is, and you've probably been there as a pilot, that hair on the back of your neck, that intuition that something just doesn't feel right.
That
you can't put your finger on it.
That intuitive expertise that's telling you this doesn't look right.
Correct. Something just isn't right here. We comment about it in the cockpit, how everybody's get the hair on the back of the neck feeling. The flight lead pushes Razor 2 off to hold at another waypoint that we had created prior to the mountaintop. And something we also don't usually do, we were going to make one pass over the mountaintop. Just a quick pass to kind of take a look and kind of see, is somebody going to shoot at us? Or, what is the tactical situation on the ground? We make that pass. The crew is reporting tracks on the ground and other items that aren't making sense to us because it's a 10,000 foot, 500 foot mountain. Yeah. Why would there be a donkey tied down up there? Why would there be all these foot tracks? Why are there black spots that look like munitions have gone off if nobody's been here before? There was a lot of things that continue to not make sense, but the central part of it was that we knew that there was a guy or guys on the ground there. And so that kind of overrode everything else. We circle back around. One of the techniques for an insertion of that type down low is not coming from above like a traditional helicopter approach, but is to come in low and then cyclic climb it just with pitch up to a pinnacle point, and then you bleed off your airspeed right to the point that once you hit the pinnacle, you're ready to make a landing. And that's what we did. And coming to a hover at that point, getting ready to do the touchdown, and then the world just erupted. They saved everything that they didn't do on the first pass for our final approach and landing.
I will never forget watching that too, Greg.
Yeah, it's and I got to see the Predator, for better or for worse. And again, I don't mean to make light of it, but sometimes you have to take things with a bit of humor. It's not many of us get a chance to watch our own shoot down later on and live to tell about it.
And of course, John Chapman is up there fighting for his life. Slab, all those guys, MAKO 30s up there fighting like crazy.
And again, something we had no idea that there were other forces directly engaged. And I know from, if it was just, it may have been just minutes splitting the time where we landed on the mountaintop. Slab and his guys, and Britt is what I consider a good friend now. We've spent a lot of time talking about this. He's trying to save his guys disengaging from the mountaintop.
Yeah.
It would 30 seconds difference have us getting up there made a difference?
Who knows?
Conjecture, but I like to think if we could have been up there a little bit sooner, the whole tenor of this battle and people's lives could have changed immensely.
I remember in the video seeing something flying through the air, and you can see it in the video now that's going up toward the bunkers. And that's when you guys get hit when you're on the ground.
Yeah,
and
we took what Louis later found out was an RPG into the right engine. At the same time, we were in intersecting fields of fire with heavy machine guns from 3 positions, and small arms fire on top of that. As we were making the landing, the windows are now gone. All the flight displays are gone. I knew immediately that we had lost an engine because the electronic controls of the engines automatically beefs up the surviving engine to provide power. Things you can't even think about. You when we talk about preparing for emergency procedures, you've got this emergency and that emergency. All of them were happening. Hydraulics, engine, no cockpit displays whatsoever. Crew members already being wounded. All of it's happening in the space between 60 feet and touching down on an assault profile.
Oh man! And as you guys set down, all of this fire is just coming on top of you.
Yes. I
know your door gunner gets killed fairly quickly.
Yeah. Phil Svitek, who is I attribute Phil, awards are for other people to talk about, but he should have been awarded higher, because at no time did he, during my approach and landing, did he stop shooting, which means he was hanging his body out the door with the M134 minigun. And I can remember you can feel that thing going off because it's right behind me. And if the window's open, as we usually flew with, you can feel the concussion from it. It's such a powerful weapon. I just remember hearing and seeing and him calling out targets, and he is firing the whole way down. I truly believe that the only reason we landed upright wasn't necessarily because of my skill or anything, or the flight lead. It was because Phil, he didn't cower, as none of our guys did that day. He continued firing all the way down and suppressing that side of the aircraft. So I was able to complete the single engine approach, and it was an arrival more than a landing. I will admit that, but I still maintain it was probably one of the best landings I ever made.
Really? Good on you.
Oh, well, I mean,
I can all that stuff going on behind you.
Yeah. And we're on a slope. We're on a slope, a nose high, left side high slope in snow, which probably helped us stay upright. So when a helicopter lands on the slope, you really have to put pressure with the controls into the slope to keep the aircraft stable until it finally sets all of its weight on the ground. So you're truly flying it all the way till the rotors stop on a slope situation. I knew I couldn't just let go of the controls as much as I wanted to get out of there. I didn't know at the time how many times I had been hit, but I knew I had been hit several times in my chest plate. I know later that the reason my head was shaking was because I was hit and nicked in my helmet a couple of times. So there was a lot going on, but we were able, and I say that we as a crew, like the crew in the back, they're still doing their normal call outs.
Yeah.
They're still monitoring the ramp and they're shooting the whole time. At no time did anybody freeze or not do their jobs. And that's one of those things that comes from hard training and building up that stress inoculation, like Colonel Grossman likes to talk about. You're nobody's ever prepared for that kind of situation, but we were as prepared as we could be that day to do that mission.
Yeah. So you guys are finally on the ground. I remember Spliff Russell saying he shows up while he sees your rotors winding down.
Yes.
And the F-15Es and everything. So he's there about the same time you guys are. And you know what? He said the same exact thing. We're supposed to call MAKO 30 and do what now? They had taken off at midnight from Kuwait. They'd been down there for a long time.
That was right. Yes.
A long time. And as Chris Russell said in his episode, they'd never shot the gun at a ground target before. And now they're laying bullets down 80 meters from you guys.
It was pretty incredible.
Yeah.
And I one of the things that happened that day, and again, any combat situation it still has there's humorous parts of it. There's serious parts of it, sad, happy. One of those parts is after I was wounded, I was laying back by the ramp in the casualty collection point. I remember Nate yelling for the first danger close bomb drop. They were going, I believe, north to south. And I remember seeing the airplane, and I can remember seeing the bomb coming off of it and wobbling down. And it looks like it's coming straight at my forehead. And I was commenting on it, and I don't know why this popped into my head, but I was like, holy cow, I hope this guy was like the top of his class in flight school. But it sailed over our heads and went right into the bunker area. And then talking to Colonel Russell later, we've had that conversation. How I got a chance to talk to him at Virginia Tech later, that they had never done those things before.
It wasn't even in their doctrine. Amazing. It wasn't even in their doctrine. They didn't train to it. And I'll tell you something. Every general, when they went to him and says, we got to put close air support in our F-15 doctrine and our training, everything like that, they all went, absolutely not. I have a good friend of mine that was in a meeting in Pacific Air Forces when they said close air support's got to be part of the F-15E community. And everybody in the room went, no. And this changed that.
I hope it changed. I hope it changes in the future, because that's one of those things that are lessons learned. You don't know who's going to be in that cap. It could be an F-16, F-18, and this is, again, this coming from an Army guy. So take it for what it's worth, and your Air Force listeners can take it for what it's worth. Just like everything is about the ground guy and what we can do for that guy in the aircraft. And once he's off the ramp, any aircraft that's in a cap over a battlefield should be, at least if the weapons aren't, at least the pilot should be trained in close air support, or at least able to, because that was tight up there. You're talking about a very small area, and these guys not doing it before. I find that absolutely amazing, because they did an amazing job, and they didn't kill any of us.
Yeah. I don't know if you know this or not, but the lead in that, Major Chris Short, had come from A-10s.
Yes, I heard that.
Junior had come from A-10s, and so he was used to like going, shooting things at the ground. But the gun on the F-15E points 2 degrees up because it's made for air to air, not air to ground. Okay, so it's off center line. Okay,
I heard that.
So that must have been amazing. Not only seeing that bomb come off and come down, but then you hear that gun go off. Okay, because it goes, and those bullets are flying over your head too at the same time.
Yes,
ripping through the air, and that makes a certain sound too.
Yes, and like I said, it was I had not been we had trained with A-10s and other aircraft before in the 160th and live fire. again, so we know what that sounds like. We know what it feels like. We know what we need to say and talk about when we're working jointly. Again, one of those things that sets the 160th apart from, I hate to say it about conventional Army, but it's theory and it's in books. But before you go to combat and do this stuff, you got to do it. You got to really do it. And we had done it. So, but I had never been on the ground, boots on the ground as ammunition was being dropped danger close, and within danger close range. Yeah. One of these days, I'd like to shake every one of those men's hands because they did an amazing job supporting us and keeping the bad guys' heads down and helping us to destroy them. They did a great job.
Oh, they did a fantastic job, under some really intense conditions. And again, like you said, coming into a situation where they don't know a lot about what's going on the ground. They just see this helicopter blades spinning down and people getting off. And so you come off the airplane and you get off the airplane and you're at this casualty collection point. So people are working on you while they're trying to suppress what's going up on top of the mountain too, correct?
As soon as the aircraft touched down, you talked about it later, the blades spin down. I can finally let go of the controls. There are guys coming over the rocks. I pick up my M4. I have no idea whether I hit anybody or not, but it seemed like the right thing to do was shoot out the window at that time. Again, one of those lessons learned, I had never physically activated the emergency door release on the Chinook. I knew it in the books. I knew how it worked in theory, but I had never actually done it. Here I am in the middle of this firefight, bullets going through the cockpit. I've got my weapon down so I can reach up, grab the handle. It has to pull out, then it twists, and then you have to kick at your foot at the base of the door to force the door out. Well, the door finally goes out, and that's what everybody saw on the video and thinking it was me later on.
Yeah, we all thought it was your body falling out of the helicopter.
Yeah. Well, I decided because those guys were still shooting at me that way towards the door, that's not the direction I decided to go. That I'm going to,
for good reason.
Right. I fire again and I put my M4 in the center console. And at that time, we didn't have fancy vests or anything. We had body armor, and then we wore all of our survival gear and extra ammo and everything on a bat belt. Called it our bat belt. As I get on, of course, the jump seat was still up because the air mission commander had been there and he didn't have time to lower the jump seat. Of course, he got out of the jump seat as fast as possible. My bat belt gets caught on the seat.
Oh, no.
In the companionway, the very narrow, short corridor leading from the cockpit to the back. So I am stuck. There's still bullets. I can hear them going over my head. Luckily, no more of them. I'm already hit at this point. So I've got a pressure point on my hand. I'm trying to fiddle with a tourniquet to try to put a tourniquet on myself. I roll over and try to kick myself out of the cockpit, but now I'm stuck. My bat belt is hooked on at that point in time, I see guys in the back and I'm yelling, "Hey, I need help. I need help." There's an explosion underneath the aircraft. And you can see that on the Predator feed. An RPG comes into the nose and actually explodes underneath. But because of the armor plated seat and I'm on top of the center console, I would be dead, or I would have at least lost my legs. As it was, I had shrapnel to both of my legs. One leg is still working. So I'm using that leg to try to kick when our medic, Corey Lamoureux, he comes up. I'm yelling at him and he tells me to take my helmet off because I'm wondering why I can't hear him. Well, I can't hear him because I still got my helmet on. He grabs the back of my the handle on the back of my body armor and is able to yank me out of the cockpit area and into relative safety. And then Corey and Jason Cunningham established the casualty collection point. There's still a lot of firefight going on. We're behind the ballistic tolerant fuel tanks, self-sealing fuel tanks. So those are protecting us to a certain amount until mortars and RPGs start coming in. And that's when we move, Corey and Jason move us out of the aircraft to a casualty collection point. Because at that time, all the enemy was on the top of the hill. It was only later in the day that the enemy started coming up from below us as well and kind of flanking us.
Is Jason working on you and other people at that collection point?
Yes. So Jason, initially I'm looking Corey sees my hand is kind of dangling. My left hand, it took several rounds. It's kind of dangling down there. So he kind of puts it back into place, wraps it up real well, gets a better tourniquet on me. And then he starts treating one of our flight engineers who took a bullet into his leg. Luckily, it hit his knife, his survival knife, but that knife just shattered and his leg was filled with the remnants of blade and a 50 caliber round. I was looking over at Phil and I said, "Hey, I'm good. Take care of Phil." And that's when Corey told me that Phil was dead. And we were about 2 feet apart at that point, 3 feet apart at that point. Kind of funny. Jason at one point puts a little pulse oximeter on the end of my finger. Yeah. And he's trying to figure out why he's not getting a reading. He's not getting a reading. I kind of pick it up and the cord is dangling. So by the time he had put it on my finger and plugged it in, a bullet had gone between us and sheared that little thin electrical cord in half. We finally figured out why he couldn't get and Corey said, don't worry about that fancy stuff now. You just got to bandage and get these guys out of here. And so Corey was taking charge. He was the primary guy working on me at that point in time and getting us out of the aircraft and getting a casualty collection point set up. So he and Jason are not only caring for us, trying to get us all the wounded collected, but he's also our primary defender. Because during this time, he and Jason are our primary defenders because the Rangers and their primary job, they have to suppress the enemy. They have to push them back or kill them for us to have any chance to survive at all. So there was no reason to be, huddling around us, protecting us when kill the bad guys first. And that's what they were doing. But yeah, Corey Lamoureux, outstanding medic and great guy. He saved my life as Jason worked on me a little bit later on. There was a Ranger medic. I won't use his name. He also did a lot of life-saving on me later on that day. I'm here today because of those guys.
Later on, the second chalk meets up with you guys, but this is quite a bit later on, isn't it?
It's
the second guys. The second
it's a few hours later on. As I understand the story, Razor 02 is given orders to get the other group of Rangers in, but to an offset LZ. And so it's a few thousand feet. This is a very narrow and thin, if you want to call it a ridge, spur, pinnacle. So they're down low. They've got to try to get up that mountain, get to us. And they do that. You see the movies of World War II on Point to Hawk of Rangers climbing the cliffs and being shot at from above. Well,
I've been to Point to Hawk. I know exactly what you're talking about.
They are now doing the 2002 version of Point to Hawk, climbing up the side of this mountain with all their gear, all their ammo, fighting the enemy while they're getting in to try to link up with the rest of their platoon. Because again, I keep on going back to that concept, but that concept, you don't leave anyone behind. You mass combat power to support everybody and support everything. Their sole focus was getting up there on top. And after several hours and a lot of hard work, they finally made it up there. That Razor 2 story in and of itself, and that chalk that was on Razor 02 is just, again, one of those things we could talk about for hours because the effort that they went into and the idea of just, you can't quit. Yeah. You just can't stop. You can't rest.
There's no reset button here.
No, thank God they got up there because that was about the time that the enemy was kind of getting the upper hand because they had the high ground and being able to get the rest of the Rangers up there and really be able to mass combat power on the pinnacle is, again, another one of those things that saved our ass.
So we've got air power coming in there, F-15Es, F-16s, Class 7172. And then, of course, the Navy shows up too with their F-18s and F-14s. There's a lot of airplanes that are involved over your head at this time period. And
we needed them because there was a lot of talk of, younger people up on top, some of the younger Rangers. Why aren't they coming get us? We need to come get us. There was a lot of chatter on the radio about we need immediate medevac, but those of us on the air crew, we knew nobody was coming during daylight hours. We knew our brothers were going to be coming back, but it wasn't going to be during daylight because they were going to make for maximum success. And that's why we do things at night. That's why the majority of my career was spent flying at night, because that's what we own the night, as not only the 160th, but as a service. Mm-hmm. We function better than the enemy at night. Yeah. So we knew that wasn't going to happen till that night. So we needed that air power. We needed that overwatch, not only to engage the direct enemy, but to suppress the enemy that was trying to come up to meet us coming on. And again, I can't say enough good things about the airmen that were providing overwatch that day, because I can't even imagine the thought process of, say, you look at those gun tapes, and for me, the area being up there, when you're on the ground, may not seem that small, but when you're looking through the pipper from 20,000 feet and 50, and you're in a screaming dive and that pipper's moving around, that's some big old brass balls to stay on target and have the confidence in yourself to take that shot. Those were some shots that a lot of people wouldn't have had the guts to take. Mm-hmm. And I will always hand it to them for the guts to try.
Yeah. And Spliff Russell, they didn't even know they were being shot at.
Yeah.
He didn't even know, until he met Kevin Vance and Gabe Brown later, says, oh yeah, you guys were being shot at by RPGs and everything like that. Cause they were coming down close.
Oh yeah. They were within a couple thousand feet. Yeah. Now RPG range is not that great, but any projectile coming up at you is a big projectile. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And he's like saying, I didn't know that they were doing that. Well, we didn't want you guys to leave,
Yeah. Don't leave us.
I know. Don't leave us. We're not going to leave you. Okay. Cause again, we kept cycling things in and out of there. And I had set up the air refueling areas about 5 minutes south of the Shikook. So it was like on the tanker, off the tanker, on the tanker, off the tanker. It was really, really close. I named them Rush, O'Reilly, and Hannity. And just to be fair, I put 2 on the far left side of Afghanistan that weren't part of this battle, but we used them for some other things later on. And they're right up against the Iranian border. I named them Hillary and Kennedy. So the battle is finally won, but you guys are still up there. Jason Cunningham, as we know, of course, bleeds out.
Yeah.
And then finally they send 3 other helicopters up to get you guys.
So the battle kind of peaked and troughed all day. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was skirmishes all day, suppressed by the ground. There were other SR teams, funny enough, that we had inserted the night before, who are now, they turned the tables and they're now supporting us and be able to see the valleys and the ridge and the spurs that these bad guys are trying to crawl up. So they're calling in fire on those. And finally, night is beginning to fall, getting really, really cold. And we get the call that they have a plan in place, that they're going to bring everybody up and they're going to get us out. And I will tell you, anybody who's been on the ground and been through a really shitty day, one of the most beautiful things you can hear in the world is the sound of rotor blades
coming up,
topping through the air, coming towards you. And Chinook is unmistakable. And we knew it was going to be our Chinooks. They were not going to leave that to anyone else. First Chinook comes in. It's kind of funny. Again, I won't use the service or to protect the innocent, but the security element gets off the helicopter and takes a knee to provide security. Well, you have these Rangers who have been up on this mountaintop all day, hauling our sorry wounded asses around the mountaintop for protection and fighting. And now they have to carry us into the aircraft as well, while this other element is taking a knee and facing outward. So, so the Rangers, as Rangers do, they will complain and bitch later, but it's now time to do the job. They carried us to the aircraft. One of our other flight engineers, Ted, was on that first aircraft.
Yeah.
And I just remember seeing his face, and it's like, again, he's like me. He's not the best looking guy in the world either, but it was one of the most beautiful faces I ever saw in my life. They get us off. As I understand, the security element collapses back into the third aircraft. And the plan is, as I understand from the crew chiefs, they're going to take us directly down to a C-130 that was going to be on the assault strip at Gardes, dirt strip down there. We get down there, and apparently just before we got there, the C-130 came in, and the C-130 went off the end of the runway. Oh. So there's our ambulance is gone. As everything, thank God for, our 160th planners, my boss, back in the jock, you never go with one contingency. You always have 3D. So there's some British Chinooks there. So I'm dazed and confused, half in shock. I have no idea what's going on. They told me I was getting in a C-130. Well, now I'm getting in a Chinook, but now this Chinook has people in weird uniforms speaking weird. It was actually British Chinooks. They were the backup to the backup for casualty evacuation from Gardes. And so I was transported back to Bagram in the back of a British Chinook with some of our medical people on board. They got us to the surgical unit. I forget the numerical designation, but again, great guys operating out of a dirty basement in the Bagram control tower. There's some really neat, I think the guy's name is Todd Ayers. He was an anesthesiologist, but a great picture of him like putting me under and sticking a tube down my throat so they could do that initial surgery.
They're working on your hand.
Yeah, they're trying to stabilize my hand, do whatever they can to the shrapnel wounds to my legs. I don't remember saying this at all, but my boss said when he came in to see us that he was like, and his traditional attitude, he was like all smiles, a bigger than life kind of guy, and loud, and asking me how I was. And you don't look so good, Greg. And I said, hey, I'll be back flying soon. And he was thinking to himself, Greg, you're not even going to be in the service anymore after this. He told me that years later. I had no idea we had that conversation. That kind of stuck with me because that was I was not going to let this event define me. The definition of me was what I made of this situation afterwards. So I was bound and determined to get back in the cockpit. And again, that's another story of 2 years of great doctors, a great occupational therapist who would literally go to a Chinook simulator with me up at Fort Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania, a National Guard simulator. And we would get into the simulator and she would see what I needed to do and design exercises for me to do those things. So
that's amazing.
You look at a battle like this, and as we talked about how our lives are intertwined, how one person like me, not that much, the amount of effort and the people that went into kind of recreating me was, today it still chokes me up.
It's doing the same to me.
And it goes to that fact again that, not even just on the battlefield, we don't leave people behind. People who never saw the battlefield or will never see a battlefield had a lot to do with me recovering. My family, the medical professionals, all had a piece in my recovery and getting back to the battlefield. So you have this one wounded person or several wounded persons, but there's this whole network out there past us. It's just amazing to think of, because when we think of the battlefield and what gets stacked on top of us, I've been involved with the ATO process and such, so I understand that. Most service members don't realize that people like you and the other elements that were involved in this were so intertwined for the success of this, this 1 acre spot on the ground that's kind of global and worldwide. And it just, to me, it's like blows my mind and it's awe inspiring. We have this network of warriors and people who care for warriors that have it's very humbling to me that all of this went in to not just me. I'm not that narcissistic, but it protected me, it saved me, and it brought me back. So there's the system and the life and being able to continue to serve. I was in for 33 years before I retired. It's still awe-inspiring to this day and an honor to have had the career that I did.
So you're undergoing medical treatment for a couple of years, aren't you?
Yeah. It was a total of 9 surgeries to reconstruct my hand. We thought it had been fixed after 4. Yeah. And I went back to combat, and then a couple of tendons snapped under the pressure, and I was not able to move my fingers. So they went in and did some more surgeries, and I actually just have a titanium spar in here now where a wrist would be. A lot of new tendons, and it all works like it's supposed to.
You continue flying though in the military.
Yes.
Did you fly in Iraq also?
Yes, and then went on to I was in other special mission units later on. Doing a variety of stuff all around the world. Yeah.
Man, you had a great career, brother.
Oh, I did. I tell people the things I've been able to do and see and the training I hate to sound like a recruiting poster, but I couldn't have had a better life. My wife might not agree with me. It's just hard on her.
I think both of our wives would agree.
It was an amazing life, seeing some amazing things, being with just awe-inspiring people and amazing people to work with. It was just a great life.
The name of Jimmy Doolittle's autobiography, I think, is called "I Could Never Be So Lucky Again."
Yes, that's a good term.
The truth? We could never be so lucky again.
Not in so many instances. I could, especially March 4th. But you look back on a career like that, and it's just very, very lucky, very fortunate.
Yeah, very fortunate. Brother, we've been talking for a long time, man. This has been fantastic.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Greg, thank you so much for coming on and being on the Lessons from the Cockpit show. And we
really didn't even get into any of the lessons learned. Okay.
But we did kind of at the same time, because you talked about, I'm not going to leave anybody behind. I'm not any different than anybody else because I'm in this elite group. I just train differently.
Yes.
And we train to a different mission set. We train it more intensely. Like I'm going into the NFL, and our NFL isn't about points. Our NFL is about people's lives. Okay. And you also talked about supporting the customer. You mentioned that so many times, and we would say the same thing in the tanker. It's about supporting our customer. Yeah. We're just up there as an airborne gas station. But if I know a little bit more about what my customer does, and about their timing, and about the things that they have to do, then I can do my job better and get them to where they need to be and set them up for success.
Absolutely.
So those are the lessons that you've talked about as we've gone through this, which have been fantastic, man. Fantastic. So, hey, brother, it's great to have you on. Folks, Greg Calvert's been with us.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you, Mark.
To all my listeners out there, you've gotten a really good look at the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment with Al Mack and Greg Calvert. Man, what incredible stories. Being in these helicopters, getting shot down, these acts of heroism by the Rangers and MAKO 30, trying to go back and find Neil Roberts because we leave no one behind. I thought this was going to be the last episode of the Roberts Ridge series, but next week we're going to have Spliff Russell's commander on, and he's going to talk about commanding a squadron during the global war on terrorism. I ask all of you to support our show. Go and look at wallpilot.com and order some of the prints that are there for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. These aviation art prints are printed on vinyl. They're really detailed, and they're great conversation pieces. They come in 4, 6, and 8 foot lengths. We did a 30-footer for one guy, though. So we can also do custom orders with your name, tail number, the unit, even the weapons load on a particular airplane. And we have airplanes from World War II all the way up to modern aircraft. We're working on World War I. We've got a couple of commercial airplanes, but now I'm concentrating on some of these helos. This and previous episodes of my podcast, Lessons from the Cockpit, can be found at my website, markhasera.com, under the podcast pull-down box. And I'm grateful for all of you taking the time to listen to these shows and download them. Have a great week, folks, and we'll talk to you next week on the Lessons from the Cockpit show.